Just a quick disclosure to share in conjunction with this podcast. Each of us are speaking to our personal experiences and do not consider ourselves experts and cannot offer medical, therapy, financial, or legal advice. We represent a wide range of experience on the autism spectrum and will always honor each perspective that is brought to our discussions. Our experiences, opinions, and perspectives are all unique and different and will be celebrated. Thank you so much for listening and connecting with us. Thank you. Welcome to Navigating Adult Autism. We're just 7 moms with a bunch of perspectives, a lot of opinions, and a lot of experience. Our topic is siblings tonight, and we have a lot of siblings here. We have 5 of them and 2 on the phone that are joining us. And we have Jess, Hannah, Nathan, Austin, Melina, and Colby on the phone, and Nicole on the phone. So welcome, everybody. And we are here to talk about what it's like to be a sibling with another sibling on the spectrum. And some of them even have other diagnoses as well. And we can talk about that. And we're just going to jump in, and anyone can talk about anything. But we do have some questions that we're going to start with. And I think the first question, we can go around, take turns. But when did you realize something was different about your sibling? And do you have a specific memory that's something like, this is something going on? So who wants to start? Austin, you start.
Okay, I'll start. My brother is deaf and autistic. And so, in all honesty, I did not really realize anything was different about him for a long time.
Okay.
I grew up with, parents who advocated that Connor should be treated the same way as everybody else. And I was the one who would go to therapy with Connor and make him do stuff. So I didn't realize that therapy wasn't everything that everybody had to do with their sibling, and had to go to play therapy and had to do all these things and get a diagnosis. I didn't realize
it was a normal part of life.
It was just normal. And even into in all honesty, probably not until the 4th grade did I really realize he's really different.
Okay.
Because when I went to school, you were gonna treat my brother the same way. There was no conversation about it. There was no, just because he couldn't talk with his voice, he talked with his hands, or because he didn't look at you the same, that didn't matter to me. And really, it was probably until in the 4th or maybe 3rd grade, I went to a SIBS conference. And that was the first time that I was like, whoa, wait a second. There's more people. Because at my school, I was the only one who was a sibling, first of all. And second of all, had somebody who even had a diagnosis of autism. Other kids in Connor's SPED class had other developmental diagnoses or had other physical diagnoses. And it was just different. So yeah, I had no idea until I went to a SIBS conference. And I remember going back to the hotel room and going to my parents and saying, you didn't tell me this.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that other people had to deal with this.
Oh.
I had no idea. And my
Were
parents
you
were
upset?
Slightly upset. Also just shocked that this was real. Because like I said, for a long time, it didn't matter until I finally realized maybe he was a little bit more different, if you want to say.
Well, you're both getting older, and life presented itself to show that he was.
And then it was other kids have the same thing, or other kids, that was also probably the first time I realized I never had a woe is me feeling about my brother, and I never have. But that was probably, like I said, that conference was probably the first time I realized other kids have it a lot harder. Other kids have it where their brother doesn't speak to them. Their brother is highly aggressive. Their brother doesn't go to school because he can't, because he needs other resources. Whereas my brother could go to school, had friends, could make connections, could do things. And that was kind of my first realization of maybe it's way different for Connor and I. So yeah, that was.
So what did you remember what your parents said to you when you went in the room?
My mom just laughed.
Okay.
And my mom, and that's my mom. My parents were super young when they had us, and Connor is older than I. And so to be super young already and then have a kid, and autism was still a new thought to a lot of people. And so it was it was kind of like my parents were trying to learn at the same time that we were. And so we all just as a family learned together what it meant to be deaf and autistic.
I see.
And so I think my mom, it was just kind of like, she was like, yeah, us. Yep. Yeah. There are. And we've known it. I guess you just thought everybody else needed to treat him the same, but we knew it, that it was a different world and we were going to have to navigate through it.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Gotcha.
And my dad just kind of,
yeah. Life goes on. Yeah. Okay. Jess, do you want to?
So I wanted to say I'm kind of the opposite of that, especially with my mother being the Nidic who started the Down syndrome group of the Ozarks. I was immediately from a young age surrounded by siblings and all kinds of developmental disabilities. It wasn't until I started going to friends' house in like middle school and like 4th grade and up where I saw how other people, like my friends in school, interacted with their siblings. And I was like, oh, that's not how we interact. And I was like, I kind of wish I had that interaction. I don't get that interaction every day. And of course, my friends would be like, no, you don't want a sister. It's horrible. Yeah. But I'm like, well, I mean, so here's context. My brother has Down syndrome and autism and cannot speak. So he uses a device also from a young age, very iPad kid of us. We got the first iPad and everything. So I've been technologically advanced. But so he uses an app on an iPad to tell us what he wants usually. And so I don't get verbal interaction from my brother. And I think that has in turn had an effect on my parents now that I've moved out, because now they don't get a verbal interaction from a child because I was that verbal interaction. So anyway.
Right. No, and your mom has talked about that a little bit on previous podcasts. So tune in if you haven't. Lynn's been a great guest.
And then what's the age difference between you two?
Yes. We're very similar. I'm 21 and he's 18. But he could be 19, actually. I know. I was born in 2003. He was 2005. Okay. So we're very close in age. And I was always very pretty independent. And I really didn't notice how much attention he needed because we were so close in age. Like it wasn't like all of a sudden this baby was born and I was like 10 years old. No, like I was 3 or 2 or something like that. So,
but till you were at your friend's house, you realized other families are not operating like us. Right. Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
So my
This
brother
is Nathan.
is 32 and he's profoundly autistic. So he does not speak and he requires 24/7 care. And he was diagnosed, I want to say 1994, 95, somewhere in there. And we grew up in a very small community. And in the 90s, especially, we were really just starting to understand what autism was and how it can look so different. But in our rural community, nobody had ever met anybody like my brother before. And, my parents, they saw the differences early on before I did. They noticed him staring at the ceiling fans and he's not responding to his name. He's not really responding at all. He's walking in circles and he's always climbing things. So they remembered that first, but kind of like what you were saying, we're close in age. And so that was just my norm. And I wasn't in school yet. And we lived in the country. And other than seeing cousins every once in a while, he was the only other kid in my life. So that was just normal. So not really a single event that made me think, that's different, but maybe kind of a collection of experiences. I think around the time that I started school, or maybe right before, what I started noticing was how parents respond to my brother is different than how they respond to me. So my parents were not necessarily strict, but I had to follow rules that he didn't have to follow.
Good point.
Everybody's nodding their head.
Yeah, all the siblings are nodding their heads yes, by the way.
Well, here's a classic one. He never, ever wore clothes for the first, I want to say 12 years of his life. Trying to get him to just stay in clothes was a struggle. Yeah. He hated the texture. He just wanted to be naked. Sensory. He just wanted to be naked all the time. I couldn't just do that.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying I was walking around trying, but the response was very different. But as he got a little bit older, then we started to see self-injurious behavior. So biting our wrists to the point that we're bleeding and we're leaving thick calluses on our wrists. And then that eventually morphed into, we're starting to bite other people. We're starting to bite me. And I said, well, this doesn't feel right. I don't like this at all. And I'm retaliating. And so it started to feel like we were just fighting all the time. And that's when I started having conversations with my parents. You know, what is going on here? I don't understand. And I don't remember how old I was when we'd used the word autism, but at around the same time I was going to school and having interactions with kids who don't do this. And so then it really hits home, you know. They used that word autism. And I think it was around the same time that I started kindergarten or maybe first grade that I realized the permanence of that diagnosis and how much support he was going to require. And that was really hard because I was thinking, this is how life is going to be forever. He's always going to be running away, trying to break out of the house so he can run off. You know, one time I remember waking up in a cold sweat because somebody's knocking on our door, and it's a lady from our church, and it's 2 a.m. And she says, I'm so sorry to bother you, but your little one has run across the street to the store where we live behind, and he's jumped into a minnow tank because there was water. They sold live bait at this store.
Oh my.
And he had seen it earlier that day, and he was always going to water. And I mean, he would bust out windows. He would make little ladders out of his clothes and things to get up to the window to climb out. And so I'm thinking, are we going to be scared forever that he's just going to get out and get hit by a car? So yeah, that was a profound moment for me.
Yeah, it would be. That would be something young for pounding on the door. Yeah. Let's go to someone on the phone, which is Colby or Nicole. Colby, you want to jump in and let us know?
Sure, I can jump in.
Okay. When did you realize?
So my sister is 6 years older than I have a brother that's in the middle. And I think I noticed probably when she was 2, so I was probably like 8. And the only reason I noticed is because my parents pulled me aside and said, oh, she's not talking. And she's, back then it was severe autism. So profound autism, nonverbal, pica, epilepsy, all the stuff. And so they were still figuring it out. We were in a small town of 500 people. So there weren't a lot of resources, and I had never heard of it. But honestly, once I heard it, I was just kind of like, okay. And moving on, it didn't really affect me again until I was in 4th grade, and my parents pulled me aside and said, we have to move. We moved from small town over to Kansas City because they had more resources. And all I heard was, I'm leaving behind all my friends. It was a small class size of like 10 or 11 students where we were all best friends. And then I was moving to the city where I had 80 students, and I'm a very introverted person. And that was probably like one of the hardest parts for me, is just like uprooting. And, you know, I didn't fully understand. I was like, okay, we're doing it all for my sister Haley. Yay. But like, I was so like mad and like upset because like, I was leaving behind all my friends, and that's the only thing I really remember. I mean, in between there, it's just, you know, we had to eat special food, diets changed, and you know, we had to deal with, you know, family and other people that didn't really get it.
Yeah, siblings here are all shaking their heads. Yes, by the way, Colby. Yes, with the comments you're making, they're all shaking. Yes. Yes. Keep going. Sorry.
But no, I mean, that was really the first time it really like affected me, because it didn't bother me that she didn't talk. I mean, we still loved her. Autism doesn't show as anything. So she looked, you know, quote unquote normal. And I think that was kind of the struggle, is because once you go out in public or anything and they start having behaviors or something happens, we just wouldn't go out as much anymore because you face the judgment on people's eyes, or they say awful things, or, you know, make those looks. And, you know, we would just not do that or not go out because of stuff like that for a while. So,
right. Yeah. We were going to talk about that later too, actually, about going out in public and how you handled that. That's a good point. Nicole, what about you? When did you first realize that something might be a little different about your siblings? Should say, because you have
Well, I am the oldest of 5, and my 2 brothers, Nathan is 22, I believe now, and Chase is 19. And from the start with Nathan, he was actually born a blue baby, so he didn't have enough oxygen in his blood. He had heart problems. So from the very start, it was okay, this is going to be, he's different. He's going to need extra care. He's going to need all this extra stuff. And I don't remember exactly when the autism diagnosis came in for him. But I'm really lucky in the sense that my mom has a lot of experience with this stuff, both, because of, my own personal experiences, because I've got various diagnoses myself. And we have a cousin who also got diagnosed. As soon as the signs started showing, it was just here we go again. So from the start, we knew that things were going to be difficult with him and going to be challenging. And I do remember, I think when it really kind of hit for me was with Nathan. I want to say he was maybe 4 or 5 years old, something like that. He had been, he didn't talk quite as much as like normal kids his age, but he still talked. And then he actually had a brain aneurysm, and he lost, I want to say 95% of his speech, and it's just never really come back. And that was really hard, to accept and understand, especially given my own experiences with things. I was like, oh, okay, well, just give them time and they'll grow out of it. And no, it's not that way for them. And with Chase too, pretty early on, we knew stuff was going on with him. He used to scream at night for hours and hours and hours. It's the reason why now I can literally sleep through anything. But that was just
a lot of
another
heads shaking
side.
yes again with that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not alone.
So a lot of screaming, a lot of, different diets very early on. And, I was old enough at the time to also understand what was happening and what was going on. And my mom has always been, she's tried to be very clear with things like this and explain that, things are going to be different. This is how we do things. So for me, that was just life nearly from the beginning.
Okay. Thank you. Hannah, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll go.
Okay.
So I'm Hannah. My brother is Zion, and he is 15 months younger than me. So a lot of, sorry, I was waiting so long that my throat was like clogging up as I was waiting to speak. But yeah, so I never really noticed anything was different until I realized he couldn't talk. That was the first thing. He couldn't talk until he was 5. But to me still, like, he was my best friend and my closest playmate. So it didn't really process that wasn't normal, because I wasn't really interacting with other kids that much. But then he got to the age of around 4 was when he was diagnosed with autism. And this was also kind of like you guys were saying, there wasn't much research about autism when he got diagnosed. So I didn't really know what that meant. But like there were signs like early on where I realized that he was different. Like, for example, he could not touch the floor with his feet. Like, outside of home, he had to be carried everywhere. And I remember being like so jealous because I was like, why does he get to be carried all the time? Like, I have to use my leg, And then also, like, I think when I got older and I saw how other students and like peers treated Zion is when I really knew that he was not accepted. Like, I witnessed a lot of bullying on the playground. And there was one incident where my mom brought us to this karate class. And I was probably, I want to say 5. Zion was 4. And the other kids were just like relentlessly mocking Zion because he still couldn't talk. So he would mimic a lot of the time. And so when they were doing like the I don't know, like, karate noises, he would like mimic that, and the kids were mocking him.
Did you use your karate moves on them?
Yeah,
You know what?
saying.
I almost did because I was really, really mad. That's when I started getting like really protective of him.
Yeah.
But I was always protective of him. But and then I remember my mom sobbing like on the car ride home, and I was just like in the back seat, like, wow, like this is his diagnosis is making people sad, and other people do not accept him and love him the way I do. And so that was something that was really hard to accept for me as a kid.
Oh, gosh. Melina? Hi.
So I have a younger brother, and he is 4 years younger than me, and he has autism.
And how old are you?
I'm 24.
Okay.
And I think I was probably in 5th grade when I started going to like my friend's house to have sleepovers and stuff. And just like seeing their Sylvie's kind of like Jessica said, like very different from
me and my brother's relationship. And I would always go out with my friends' families. Like, they would always want to take me places because, you know, like,
Yes.
my brother just, it was hard for him to go out. So, like, he just got overstimulated and, like, would scream a lot. And so, just seeing that through my friends,
Yeah.
it really just,
You saw how other families operated
Yeah.
and you noticed the big difference between them.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, but all my friends were always so nice to my brother. Like, I'm very thankful for the friends that I had because they never gave him dirty looks or like treated him differently. And I went to a very small school, and everyone was very, as far as I know anyway, were very nice to my brother. Like, even his classmates. Like, I'm very thankful that my small school that didn't really have a lot of that treated him as good as they did.
So he went to the same small school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
He did. And
That says a lot about you too. That your friends loved you and
yes. Yeah.
wanted to treat him just as much.
And like some of the guys in my grades were turds, and they wouldn't like be rude to him or anything, but they'd just be guys and like goofing off and
Right.
stuff. And my friends would be like, you know, you have to make sure you're nice to Tanner because we'll kick your ass. Like, no one's mean to Tanner. And so like my friends have always just been very supportive about that. So it never really, I don't know, it didn't really ever hit me that like, oh, he's a lot different, because my friends always included him.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Has that changed from school until now? Like, how are you still either protective of him or when you go out in public? Like, how has that changed? And you guys can all jump in. It doesn't matter whose turn it is. But you know what I'm trying to say? Like, as a child, is your relationship's different than when you're an adult out with them now?
Yeah.
Has that changed? Or what do you do? Do you do anything different?
I'm still the same.
You're still,
I'm still
Are you?
super protective.
Super
Okay.
yeah.
But I also like for Zion, I include him heavily in my current friend group because it's very hard for him to make friends of his own. And so like I still feel that protectiveness anytime I'm around him, really. Or just like the instinct to jump in and help him when something's going wrong or when someone's not understanding him. Like it's almost embedded in me, you know?
Right, right. Which is like parents too.
Yeah.
I mean, which, you know, that makes me think of that because we all as parents jump in and help, you know, with my own son if he's has some fit, which doesn't happen very often anymore in public. But you have to jump in and explain because, you know, he's 6'2", almost 6'3", and he's 32, and this isn't normal, and especially in this day and age with security and everything that's going on in the world. You know, it draws a lot of attention. So I'm sure you guys are all used to your siblings drawing attention.
I mean, in the adult world, I'm still very protective of Connor. I always will be. It's like not an option. And he is the older brother, but like a lot of the times, and I don't know I think everybody's kind of different, but you know, some days, especially growing up, there were days where I felt like the older sibling.
Sure.
Because you have to take care of that for them, or you're the one at school, you're doing those things. But as an adult, it does change. Like I was kind of saying earlier, like, you know, before I, you know, met my now husband, like when I would go on dates, I could tell you from the first date if I was going to go on a second date with that guy because of how he reacted, either about how I talked about my brother and when I said, oh, my brother's deaf and autistic, or just things they would say about this community. It was like an instant, I know how this is going to go. Yes or no. And until I met my husband, I mean, nobody had ever like tried to learn sign, had asked questions about what is autism, or like, you know, they'd go, oh, I've seen Rain Man.
Right.
And you're like,
The stereotype.
thanks. You're like, thanks for that. So, okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, it goes into your adult life of like, how do you treat people? And I mean, I know for Nathan and I, like, it's my work. I'm a nurse for people with disabilities. I'm a nurse for people
That was
who.
our next next
yeah,
question.
that's
Good.
what I was going to
That's
say.
a good lead in. So I'm glad you did that.
It goes hand in hand. And, you know, sometimes I know some siblings who, because they know for probably a good amount of the rest of their life, they're going to help take care of their sibling. They don't go that route. And I respect that. I at first was a nurse and that was not going to be the route I went. And then here I am working with people with developmental disabilities and going into their homes and helping them as a nurse. And, you know, I think it usually does bleed through us into our adult life and through other things like that.
Right. That's what I was going to ask was one of the questions that how did your siblings' diagnosis affect you as your job in adulthood, or if you even want to be a parent, or the job that you're in now, or what career are you going for if you're still in college? Jump in, anybody.
And Nathan, you work.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes.
Colby, you go right ahead.
Colby.
Yeah. So I'm actually a special ed teacher now, and kind of like I don't remember the name, but whoever just talked, I fought it. It was my everyday life, taking care of my sister. I changed my major 5 times just because, like, I knew whatever I did, I was going to help people. But in the end, I ended up going back to special education, which is what I'm doing now and been doing for 5 years. But I totally understand the leaving it, like, or wanting it to not be your life, but it just sucked me in, and it is. It's hard because I see how I always say, like, the people that need the most patience deserve it. So, like, those that can't control it. And so, like, I look at, the typical students that are in the classroom that, don't have special needs. And I'm like, I would much rather work with the kids with special needs because at least there's the excuses for their behaviors. They're not just.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Sorry, got another call on the phone. But
no, it definitely does affect every part of your life. And,
yes.
The same thing with, my wife, whenever I first met her, didn't, accept my sister, then she wouldn't have been my wife,
Okay.
No, if she wouldn't have.
Oh, if she wouldn't have. Sorry.
That's why we're married.
I was just going to say, how'd you navigate through that?
No,
But anyway, she did. Okay, gotcha.
No,
sorry.
if she wouldn't have, then I wouldn't have gotten it,
Right.
And so it's just, I 100% agree. Like, it bleeds into your adult life, and it for the better, it doesn't have to be for the word, for bad, but I think it's made a lot of positive things in the future. It's changed my philosophy on, like, how I view people.
Right.
You can see someone out in public, and maybe that you don't know who has autism. You don't know if they're having the worst day of their life. So it's changed how I treat people and how I view people out in public. They could be having their worst day in life. You don't know what's going on. And so that's,
Right. That's a good point.
Nathan? I really relate to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm
Hannah.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really relate to that. I actually just wrote an essay about how siblings with autism are, like, so much more empathetic than just your average person, just because of what it teaches you. So yeah, I really relate to that.
Good point.
And Hannah's working on her teaching degree.
Yeah, actually. So yeah, I was going to do special education. My mom used to always say that I was Zion's greatest teacher. Yes. Just because I don't know, it was just something that was always the natural for me. So I think I don't know, I've always known that I was meant to be a teacher. So luckily I never had to go through the process of, like, changing my major 1,000 times because I knew. But originally it was going to be special education, but then I transferred, and it was going to take a whole nother year to do special ed. So I was like, you know what, I'll do regular ed, and then maybe one day, if I don't like it, I'll transfer to special ed. But yeah.
Right. What about you, Jess?
Yeah. I think that my brother's, like, the care that he needed and the independence that I already had as a child, that independence grew as I got older. However, I will say, every time, like, we did, like, introduce yourself in class and say a fun fact, I would say, my fun fact is my brother has Down syndrome also. And I would say that, and then I'd be like, as I got, that was like 4th, 5th grade, and then I got to, like, 7th, 8th grade, and I was like, no, like, this is, my identity. And, like, Jack would have friends, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you're Jack's sister. And I'm like, no, I have an identity. I got to figure it out. Guess what I'm still doing at 21?
You'll keep doing
even though I'm, and I am incredibly independent, and I think Jack is as well. He wants someone to supervise him, but he doesn't want you to do it for him.
Right.
But he'll just make sure you're standing there.
Is your career path going down that? Or do you know yet? It's okay if you don't know.
So I was a BA in theater. So I was going to be stage management or directing with, like, community theater. And then I freaked out because I'm a junior and I don't know what I would do with that, like, immediately out of college. So I now theater education and my minor's in dance.
Oh, good.
But I'm also looking at psychology as well.
Right. Oh, good. Good.
Theater kids unite.
I did just have a thought about that, though. If there are siblings that are listening, I can remember when I was in middle school, high school, and we're starting to have the college conversation. Friends and teachers, knowing my experience with my brother, thinking, oh, you should absolutely go into special education. You should. And I think it's important for siblings to know you can do whatever you want. You don't necessarily, if you love it and that's your passion and it gives you drive, fantastic, do it. But do what you want to do and what makes you happy, because I think sometimes our identity gets tied up in the disability, the things that we can't do and the things that we have to support. And that kind of becomes our life. And again, that's okay, but know that you have other things you can do. And I remember hearing that a lot, and kind of like Colby said, I fought it. I did not want to do that, because when he was little, I was his champion. I fought for him. I can remember being in a ball pit with him and some other kind of bratty girl, and he stole a ball from her, and she yelled at him, and so I chucked the ball at her head. I was didn't have great emotional regulation skills, and so I chucked the ball at her and tattled to my mom, and I was really upset about it. But I did go through a period. My brother entered residential treatment when he was, I don't know, he was 12 or 13, just because the behaviors were so aggressive and nobody slept and it just wasn't a safe environment. And so when he was placed in that facility, I went through a period where I just tried to forget about him, which is something that I hate to say now, but I needed a time in my life that it was more about me and not about him. And so when people would say that knew better, you should go into special education or you should work with children with autism, that was triggering to me, because it felt like an attack against my identity, or even just trying to figure out what my identity was. It felt like it was a step backwards and not a step forward. And it wasn't until I got into college and I found community that I felt more of a passion. So I'm a speech language pathologist now, and I have been doing that for about 10 years, which is really weird to say, but I've been doing it for about 10 years. And I work primarily with individuals on the spectrum, and I work a lot with augmentative and alternative communication and finding voices for people. And that is my drive. That's my passion, because we never did find a way to really get my brother talking. We've got a little bit of communication, but I don't want families going through the struggles that we went through, because you see a lot of behaviors that come from, I cannot communicate. So if I cannot communicate, I will find some way to let you know. And sometimes that is biting, that is scratching, that is kicking, that is hitting. And I like being able to decrease that for other families.
Good. Well, I almost called you Mark. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, if I could chime in, because you know, you said that it is important to know that, you know, siblings, like, they may feel pressured to go into that industry, but they don't necessarily have to.
Right.
I am somebody who, you know, again, like, from the beginning, people were like, oh, you're so good at it, you need to do this, and I just did not want to. And I've worked a ridiculous career over the last 12 years, I would say. Like, I worked at Disney World. I was in college for acting. And then in more recent years, I've actually moved over into doing media. And now I'm a dance photographer. I travel and do all of that. But one reason that I do this sort of thing is because I have the understanding that eventually I'm going to have to come back in and start taking care of my brothers. And a lot of my childhood, my high school years, middle school years, I was like the second parent. I was taking care of them. So I'm using this time to live for myself. And that is important. And that's not to, you know, degrade anybody who does choose to go into a special education field. Like, I applaud people, especially siblings, who grew up about it and do find their passion in it. And I'm lucky enough with my field, where I do get to work with a lot of disabled individuals, and it has opened up a lot of opportunities for me, but I still get to be on the media side of things, where, like, I'm there telling people's stories, but then I get to disconnect from it when I need to, you know, and so it's important to find that balance. But then with that comes the guilt of, I'm the oldest, I should be taking care of my brothers, where in fact, no, you need to be able to live your own life. So a message to siblings who maybe find themselves in this situation, like, dealing with that guilt of living your own life is so hard to deal with, but it is essential. You need to figure out who you are as a person. And if who you are is working in that industry, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. but maybe it's not. And that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Good point. Good point. That very good points. Melina, what do you think? What are you
when
up
I was
to?
in high school, I just like everyone else, everyone told me, "Oh, you should be a special ed teacher." And so when I graduated, that's what
It's
I
interesting
thought I was
that
gonna be.
everyone said that to you.
Wow, the pressure that you guys had on
Yes,
yourselves,
that's a
as
lot.
growing up, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And so when I was in college, I got my associate's degree and I was like, this is not what I want to do.
Right.
Like, I realized I'm going to have to, my brother's always going to be in my life. So it's not like I'm ever not going to deal with people with disabilities again. Like, through high school too, I volunteered at Camp Barnabas all the time. And so like my life was very, which I loved it, but I got to that point where I was like, I don't want this to be my life all the time. You know, like I don't want to get burnt out. And then later in life, when I do have to take care of my brother, be so burnt out, I get frustrated and don't even want to do it because I'm going to take care of him one day.
Yeah.
But I'm a dog groomer now and I love it.
Oh, good. Good.
So yeah, I just wanted to try something new and I tried it and I loved it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you guys are all talking about take care of your siblings. Is that something your parents have already talked to you about, or is it in the back of your head? Because I've heard, listening to therapists, a different autism specialist, I've heard both sides of the coin. I've heard that it's good, you know, if they want to, that's fine. But then I've also heard it's not your job to take care of your sibling. You have your own life. You may have your own families one of these days. I mean, I've heard some pretty notable therapists say that that pressure shouldn't be put on you to know that right now at 21 that you're going to have to take care of a sibling the rest of your life. But if you want to, that's fantastic. I mean, it's kind of a touchy subject. So how do you guys feel about that? I feel like I kind of feel for you guys if it's because there's some tears going on right now too. And that's a lot. So how do you feel about it now? And, you know, listen, it could change too. I mean, if you have your own family or whatever career path you're going on, maybe you move to Hawaii. I mean, who knows? A lot of things can happen in your life. How do you all feel about that or navigate it? Or what are your thoughts on it? Or do you feel like sharing about it?
Well, my
I-
parents, you go ahead. You go ahead. You go.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of along the same line of what I was talking about. Like, there is a lot of that guilt that comes from, like, I should be taking care of my family. I love my family. I love my brothers. I should be taking care of them. And I think one of the biggest clarifying moments for me was I cannot take care of them if I haven't taken care of myself first.
True.
And for me, that looks like establishing a career where I can get myself set up in a good place. And, you know, like I haven't completely cut myself off from my family. Like, I come back out there to Missouri all the time. I was just there. I come out, I work with them, I help, I do whatever I have to. And I have found that now that I'm like, I've been dealing with the guilt of it for 10 plus years, I would say, ever since I first left home, you know, but it's only been the last year and a half, I would say, that I've started to feel like I've actually gotten a hold of a good balance and understanding. And that is a conversation I've had to have with my mom multiple times. Like, I cannot have my brothers be my job because I stopped viewing them as brothers. They were now a problem I had to take care of. And I didn't want that. So for me, it was healthier to put a little bit of that distance. But it's so different for everybody, and everybody's situation is a little bit different. And yeah, it's definitely impacted how I interact with my brothers. So for me, I had to put that barrier up and say, nope, I will come out and help when I can and do what I need to do. But at the same time, I got to take care of myself first, because that is preparing for the future.
Okay. Well said, Nicole. Anybody else?
Thank you.
I'd love
Austin?
to.
Colby? Austin?
So I'd love to jump in on that.
Sure.
I actually, so when I turned 18, I was allowed to be a caretaker for my sister as a personal care assistant in the household.
Okay.
And so instead of leaving, I started taking care of her. And I 100% agree with what you just said. It blurred the lines for me. It's like, okay, a job, brother. I started feeling just kind of like, okay, do I count these hours? Like, am I actually being a good brother? You know, and then now I live 15 hours away in Georgia and my family's still in Missouri. And, we go back and see each other more now, but my family is first. So I have a wife, 3 kids under 3, and so I still love my sister, and, she'll always be part of my life. But as far as the pressure that my parents, I won't say pressure, but we've had that talk. My parents sat me and my brother down and said, we go on this cruise and we die, then you guys are going to take care of her.
Lots of heads shaking yes again here.
Here's how it's going to happen, and here's everything that's set up.
Here's where the will is.
Right.
Here's where this is.
It's up to you guys to figure it out. And so it's kind of, it's a lot to throw on, because I also, that affects me, my wife, my brother and his wife. And so, and we kind of, they said that, and they haven't really talked about it since then. And, we'll deal with it, I guess, when it happens. So
gotcha.
I hold my breath every time they go on a cruise. Yeah. So.
I'm like, no, I say to my mom sometimes, I'm like, listen, you got to give me at least another 20, 25 years. Like, I'm just getting started.
That's right. That's right. That's cute. Anybody here at the table?
I would say that I'm, if something happens to my parents tomorrow, I'm ready, willing, and able. And I've known for a long time that that's going to be my role, and I wanted to take that on.
Okay.
But I do have some misgivings about it, because I know that I could do it tomorrow, because right now we have lots of support for Zach. And so it would be really easy to just, as much as possible, try to maintain that normalcy for him.
And he's in residential care. Which helps.
That helps a lot, but we are also constantly still to this day having to fight almost the same amount that we were back when we were first trying to get him services. So sometimes, even though you have services, you're still fighting for them sometimes.
Correct.
And that takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time.
Out of your time.
Exactly. When you're doing all the other things and you have your own full-time job, that's really difficult. And my parents still struggle with that. In residential right now, sometimes the struggle is, we want to give him a roommate. We want to give him 2 roommates or 3 roommates. And you can't just put anybody with my brother. You can't just bunk with anybody. We have to make sure that the personalities align, or we have behaviors, and then we have to start looking at alternative placement. So things like that get really messy. This year, my dad sat down with me, and he had the stack of papers that he had to fill out to basically confirm that my brother still has a disability. He's 32. I don't know why we have to still keep having this discussion. He still has a disability, but my dad he was sick of it. He said, "Can you fill this out for me?" I said, "Sure." And I looked at it and I said, it's wanting to break down like all his finances and how much time they're spending with him and what activities they do and how does his autism impact his daily life. He said, we constantly do this.
Yeah, I don't think the listeners are aware of how much paperwork
it's
is
a ton
to
of
prove
paperwork.
that they still have a disability to get
prove that
services.
they still have a disability.
Gosh.
And so it feels like you're always kind of fighting for that. And the other thing that sometimes scares me is that his medication needs change. He's on a lot of medication for a lot of psychiatric medications, and sometimes they stop working, and then you have to figure that out. And psychiatric medications, especially, it's not quick to figure out the right cocktail, if you will, that kind of helps us stay regulated. And so we've had challenging behaviors. We've had the police called. We've been apprehended. We've been hospitalized. And so those things for the future scare me. And it's not necessarily something we've survived it before. We'll survive it again. It's that, why do we have to keep surviving this?
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Over and over again. And so that's hard, but it's something I know we can do it.
Yeah. But you're willing to take on that role right now as it stands. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Anybody else want to jump in?
Or have you had a conversation
Melina.
with your parents about it?
I've briefly had like little mentions from my parents about it. Whenever my brother turned 18, he like all of a sudden had this independence. Like, I want to do everything on my own. I'm going to college. I want my own apartment, all this. And my parents are like, all right, apartment, that might be a little much. Like, we still have to help with dinners and stuff like that. But they're like, one day we would like to have like a mini house on our property. So like, you have your own thing going on, but you're still close.
Right.
And I was like, one day when I have a house and property, he's going to be in my mini house in my yard. Yep. Like, not anytime soon, but like 40 years from now or something.
Right.
Like, I know I want him to be with me.
Good. Okay.
And my boyfriend has 2 siblings that also have disabilities. So we've been together for about 5 years now, and things are getting serious. And I'm like, that's something else I have to take into consideration.
Right.
Like, his siblings, and how are we going to navigate all that together? Because They're all very different.
A few mini houses.
Yeah.
Right.
I heard a report today. Walmart is selling mini houses for $16,000.
Might as well stock up now.
Oh my.
My parents had that conversation with me. I went away for college, and that was like part of why I went away was, I need to go away just for a little bit to like have that time. I wanted to go away, not to say that, but that was part of it was like, I need to go away and just make sure like Connor doesn't have to be the most famous sibling. You know what I mean? I joke that like I'm the fourth most famous person in my family and there's 4 of us. My dog might beat me even then. So, and it's always, oh, you're Connor's sister, you're Jamie's daughter, you're Clay's daughter, you're somebody else's person. And so I went away for school and, it was different because oh my gosh, like when I told people I had a brother who was deaf and autistic, they didn't already know him. So then when they met him, it was refreshing because it was like, new, and maybe these people had never had an interaction with somebody like my brother, and it was fresh and it was engaging and educational and advocating even. But then like I said with dating, like even now with my husband, when we were getting serious, Nick does not have any idea of this world. I mean, he's still learning. When we got together, his idea of somebody who had any type of disability was, they were in SPED class when I went to school and I didn't see them, right? Like he's from St. Louis. They were in his class and they got to be in that class all day. They were not integrated. And so, he still asks a lot of questions. There's still a lot of things like, we just had our wedding, and at the end of the wedding night, we're all getting in like this limo, and my brother's not going to go with us. He's going to go back with my family. And I walked past my brother and I didn't hug him. And my brother had a full-blown fit.
Oh, dang.
Got into the limo, told me to get out of the limo, started yelling at me, telling me that I have to give him a hug. Like, you also have to talk to me. Bah, 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 bah.
Right.
And it was just one of those things like, I'm used to it, but it was interesting to turn around and be like, Nick has seen that before, but it was like, oh yeah, it's a reminder. This is our life. And, Nick and I, when we were getting serious, it was like, you do have to understand Connor's going to be here. Because when my parents are gone, it's me. It's me. It's me and you. It's me and you for Connor. This is how it is. And so, there's no other siblings. It's just Connor and I. And so, Nick and I have had that conversation quite a few times. Nick is super encouraging about it, which is part of the reason I love him. But we've also had the conversation of like, if we have kids, Connor is going to live here. So we're going to have to buy a tiny home. We're going to have to build a little bachelor pool pad, something. And, thank God Connor's deaf, because when I do have a baby, guess who's going to hold that baby quite a bit? Right? Not me. It's going to be my brother because he's great with it. And so, but those kinds of thoughts too of like, my parents will have something set up for him and that's great. But yeah, like financially,
right?
Connor's mine.
Okay.
Those kinds of things of like, we can have kids, but yeah, we still have to I still got to go buy Totino's pizzas and have the fridge stocked. That's the way it's going to go.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Before you even have children, you still kind of have one
exactly
on the back burner.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like a double-edged sword where you feel both things of like the guilt and you want to do these things, but then you're also like, well, I got to remember, eventually at some point he is going to live here. Does he like dogs? Okay, can we have a pet dog? Can our kids do these things? Is their uncle gonna understand? Do they understand that their uncle, blah, 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 all those things. And it's one of those things I think that for all of us, we can say it never ends. It's a constant thing, whether it's every day, maybe not, because like I see my brother quite a bit. Obviously, we live both here, but it's a constant thing that like, you think, hey, we're going to get married. And like to think that your boyfriend also has siblings with disabilities, that's a lot. That's, if that was Nick and I's situation, that would be a huge conversation.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a lot to think about. And and just what's going to happen. And
what I'm feeling right now, like what I'm thinking, I guess as a parent of an only child, that when you say it never ends, we've talked about that as parents, that it never ends. And so much of you already have that parent trait that it never ends already. And that just boggles my mind.
Well, it's
in a good way and in a bad way. Like, I feel for you in a way, but it's not all negative. There's a lot of positives too. But I mean,
it's just that feeling
kudos
of
to you guys
when your parents are gone, who is the next person?
Well, yes.
And it's, for most of us, it's us. There's no one else, or there's not another sibling, or there's not another family member, or, you know, because again, with what I do, I see a lot of those families too, that either nobody had the resources or the education. And so their family member got put into placement. And now it's like that family member, unfortunately, has no connection because nobody had the resource to understand that, how to still interact with them.
Right.
And I don't want that for my brother, obviously. And it creates a whole different barrier too when my brother is deaf. He's not just autistic. He's not deaf. My entire life, I grew up with people who would say, oh, he's not deaf enough or he's not autistic enough.
Oh, yeah, we've heard that too.
And, you know, it's like, okay, well, where does he fall then? And who wants to help out or not? So I never want him to be in a situation where he can't communicate because, my brother hasn't had behaviors for a long time, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. And he'd have to go back to being harmful and it would be rough.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure.
It's weird. It's a weird life to be a sibling.
Yes. So what about you two, Hannah and Jess?
You go ahead.
Okay. So, wow, this makes me feel like very much a teenager by saying, I haven't even thought about it.
Okay.
But
That's okay.
I will
That's okay.
say, part of that is because my parents have pushed for my brother to live either alone or with a roommate. They were not even, I haven't had a talk with them, but here's what I've observed. They did not, especially my mom, did not even want to think about him having guardianship not over himself. So recently, like he turned 18 in March and we went to the courthouse and signed the document that says his legal guardians will be my parents. And I was the witness, but like, I just sat there and watched it. And I knew my mom was upset about it, but she didn't talk to me about it, which is fine. And I didn't even really think about it. And especially because I wasn't, when that happened too, I wasn't living at home. I was in a dorm at college. So I just like, we're now having this conversation and I'm like, but I also don't know what I'm doing with my life. So like now I'm like adding another person and I'm like, so that's where I'm
Not to put any
at.
pressure on your podcast, but
I was going to say, I was not thinking about it at 21 either. I was partying. So,
Yes.
and it's okay. You don't have to think about it right now. I mean, you're
And I think my parents are doing that on purpose.
Yes.
They're like, go
live your
My
life.
mom
Yes.
did that for me, and
Yes.
it was important. And I think my parents knew that. And it was so important that my mom was like, I always had an identity outside of my brother. There was never a moment where my mom and my dad were not like, well, you can't play volleyball or you this or that. It was always, they pushed me to do that. Just like you've talked about, like your independence. They pushed me to do that so that my identity wasn't just, hi, I'm Connor's sister. And oh, guess what? Connor's deaf and autistic. But like when I was in college, cool. I had this cool brother and like people thought he was interesting. But, no, I wasn't thinking like, oh, should I major in something? Or, oh, should I move back to Springfield because I got to take care of him or whatever. So I understand that thought. I wouldn't, I think Nathan's probably the same way. Like we weren't going to think about it.
So Hannah,
My parents were the same way, Austin. They so my parents were associated with Autism Speaks for a little bit. And they would have walks for Zion, and they called like his tribe, it was Zion's tribe. And I was so jealous because I was like, why does he get this whole organization and community of people to walk for him? And so my parents actually made signs that said, I think it was like Hannah's pack or something like that. So they wanted to like make me feel equally as included, which meant a lot because, in my mind, he wasn't that different from me. So I was like, what's the big idea? What's the big deal? But in terms of like taking care of him, my brother is fairly independent. He does need a lot of like mental support, and he does get very lonely. So he needs somebody. So in terms of like him living with me, that's definitely something that I've thought about. He actually does live with me right now, currently, kind of half time, just because he's not really ready to give up like home cooked meals because I don't really cook, and like, you know, just like all of the safety net that comes with just living with your parents, you know?
Right.
So he stays the night at my house probably 2 nights a week, but yeah, so it's not really something that I've thought about like you, Jessica. But it's in the back of my mind. So I'm sure that when I get older, I'll be like, okay, this is something that I'm going to have to deal with. And like when my parents are gone, that will fall on me. But I guess that's something that's never been a second thought. Like I'm okay with that. And like I'm the oldest. So I always thought of myself as second parent, especially because like as a kid, my dad traveled a lot. And so a lot of the times when Zion was having meltdowns or tantrums, I was the backup. You know, I was the one that would step in if things were getting too crazy, or I was the one that was protecting I have another little brother who's 5 years younger than me. So there was always some sort of responsibility for me. So I guess in the back of my mind, I always knew that one day when they were gone, it was also going to fall on me.
Okay. What? Sorry, Kara was asking me a question. Well, do we want to break right here? Is that what you were going for? Okay. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back, and we are going to have part 2 of the Sibling Podcast. You can listen to us at our website, Apple or Spotify, at navigatingadultautism.com, or email us at moms@navigatingadultautism.com. But we are going to continue this conversation on part 2, so please stay tuned. Thank you.